It's time to envision a post-COVID future. As we move forward from response to recovery, what challenges and opportunities lie ahead? How will we move into the future with the knowledge we have gained? How will we continue to learn? How will Windsor-Essex reflect, renew, and transform? What comes next depends on how well we understand and respond to the complicated uncertainties of this time. Together, let's explore our collective comeback from this current crisis. The Envision Community Speaker Series is brought to you by the University of Windsor and the City of Windsor.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Phoebe Lamb, Interim Associate Vice President of Student Experience at the University of Windsor. Welcome to our wonderful university and city. For those of you joining us for the first time at our Envision series, welcome. For those of you who have already attended one of our sessions, welcome back. I am grateful that you're able to join us for this important and enlightening session, Imagining Learning Post-Pandemic, with today's inspiring speaker, Dwayne Matthews. The University of Windsor is very proud to partner with the City of Windsor in presenting the third of a 6-part virtual series, bringing the greater Windsor community together to envision the next chapter that will be ever so critical in our growth as we move through and beyond this pandemic. Since the seminar is being held virtually, a singular land acknowledgement does not capture the richness of our distribution across many locations in the world. As many of the attendees are located in Windsor, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. Attendees are invited to consider their own position with regard to the land where they find themselves. As we make this land acknowledgement, it is also important that we continue to do the work to address systemic and historic injustices that Indigenous peoples have experienced. Now we bring to you welcome messages from both the Mayor of Windsor, Drew Dilks, and the University of Windsor President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Robert Gordon.
Hi everyone, Windsor Mayor Drew Dilks here. I wanted to say welcome and thank you for attending this session of the Envision a Post-COVID Future Speaker Series. And I am proud to be co-presenting the series as a partnership between the University of Windsor and the City of Windsor. This series is about inspiring. It's about learning and imagining what's ahead in our region following this pandemic. Each month, we'll be joined by nationally renowned guest speakers with expertise in areas such as business, social justice, innovation, policy, and technology. Sessions are free to attend and will look at a wide range of topics: the state and future of Canada after the pandemic, Ontarians on the move, imagining learning and equitable futures post-pandemic, COVID as a catalyst to innovation and discovery, and much, much more. This series connects to the important initiatives and links to the vision of Windsor Works, the economic development strategy Windsor City Council adopted to diversify and strengthen our economy and to support the city's future growth. Windsor Works is a roadmap for our future, and this speaker series and this partnership between the University of Windsor and the City of Windsor is part of how we get to where we want to be. Thank you to University President and Vice Chancellor Dr. Robert Gordon and to the team working behind the scenes on this series. And thanks to each of the guest speakers joining us over the next 7 months. I'm proud of this partnership that helps us go beyond recovery, moving toward envisioning how to thrive in a post-COVID world. And I'm glad you're joining us for the conversations to follow. Welcome, and thanks for being here.
I'm Rob Gordon, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Windsor. I want to thank you for your interest in the Envision, a post-COVID future speaker series, which we are proud to be co-presenting with our partner, the City of Windsor. From now through November, we'll be bringing together leaders, experts, and community members to explore the medium and long-term implications of the global pandemic on society, the economy, our work, and our lives. While the immediate response to COVID-19 continues to be a key focus for all of us, it's now time to start looking beyond that to what happens next, to the challenges, the opportunities, how we've changed, and what we've learned. What comes next depends on how well we understand and respond to the complicated uncertainties of this time. It's time to explore the landscape beyond recovering from the crisis to envision how to thrive in the emerging post-COVID landscape. There's no doubt we will continue to face many challenges on the road to recovery, but I continue to be inspired by the resilience, commitment, and generosity of our community. Although we have physically separated, we continue to face these challenges together. University of Windsor researchers are studying the effects of COVID in a myriad of ways that will help inform how we tackle future issues and challenges. Hundreds of instructors who teach at the university threw themselves into the enormous effort to move the majority of our courses online this year. Staff from across campus have shifted to supporting students and colleagues virtually and have reimagined services and programs from scratch to meet the needs of these unusual times. Our students have contributed hundreds of thousands of hours of community service throughout the pandemic. It has been an exhausting time, but through it all, there has been learning, partnership, innovation, and knowledge creation. There are many lessons we will want to take forward with us into the future. I want to thank Mayor Drew Dilks, the team from the university and the city who have brought this program together, and all of the speakers who have agreed to be part of it. We are thrilled to be partnering on this inspiring project. I look forward to learning with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon and Mayor Dilks. I am incredibly honored to introduce today's keynote speaker and UWindsor alumni, Dwayne Matthews. Dwayne received his Bachelor of Arts in 1998 and his Bachelor's of Education in 1999. As Chief Innovation Evangelist and Future of Education Strategist, Dwayne helps school boards, educators, and parents understand new and evolving themes around the future of education and work, and how to prepare children to thrive in a digitally evolving world. An international educator, Dwayne founded the Tomorrow Now Learning Labs that offer a future-focused approach towards personalized learning and assessment. Tomorrow Now's learning framework uses the most innovative and empirically based digital learning ecosystem that encourages critical thinking, problem solving, and creating value through immersive learning technologies while creating authentic learning experiences. Tomorrow Now focuses on preparing students to co-create the future. Dwayne is a recipient of the BAIE Trailblazer in Innovation Award and has addressed the United Nations and many African countries on opportunities around digital literacy. Dwayne served as Senior Education Lead for the Faubert Applied Research Center and also regularly appears on national Canadian television. I have only highlighted a small portion of the amazing and impactful experiences that Dwayne has accomplished. As you will see and feel today, Dwayne's energy will draw you to a place where you begin to critically reflect on your own experiences as you look toward the future. What Dwayne will focus on today is imagining learning post-pandemic. This is relevant to all of us, whether we are students or parents of students or educators. COVID-19 has challenged us all in many ways, but it has also provided us an opportunity to create something even more extraordinary. Following Dwayne's presentation today, we will have a brief question and answer period. Please feel free to submit via text your questions through the Q&A function on your screens, and we will get to as many questions as we can. So now, please join me in welcoming Dwayne Matthews.
10 years ago, it would have cost about $50,000 to $100,000 and a lot of human beings to turn me into a cartoon. As a matter of fact, 5 years ago, it would have been impossible to use the type of voice recognition technology, machine learning, and computer processing to be able to do any of this at all. But here we are today, and I'm doing this using probably about 11 billion transistors on a single chip inside of a pocket device. What about using extended reality that works on a VR, headset, laptop, iPad, phone with a project-based approach to curriculum while students use a combination of synchronous and asynchronous styles, voice recognition technology, machine learning, all happening inside of a virtual classroom out of country location? We're able to do all of this today. This is happening right now. So it leads us to one question. The question is, are we preparing students for 2019 or 2030? But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. So here's what I'd like you to do. If you have any questions or comments, I want you to leave them in the chat. The moderator says that we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A period at the end, and we'll be able to answer any questions and comments there. If not, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a direct message. I will answer all questions on LinkedIn, but you'll have to give me a little bit of time. And let me get out of this virtual box and come and join you in Zoom as soon as I figure out how to get out of here. It doesn't seem to be I think the button's here somewhere. Hold on one second. See you soon.
Thank you very much for having me. It's interesting to note that that little video was put together by a 10-year-old. And today we're going to spend some time to talk about why that's relevant. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It was quite kind. Thank you to the mayor and to the president of the school and to everyone that is putting this all together. It's a pleasure for me to join you this morning from my kitchen. So before I start, I typically like to put up something to create a bit of context. So my first slide, I'd like you to take 30 seconds to read it and process it and think about, what does that mean to you? We live our lives responding to a world that we know and understand that no longer exists. These are the words by Professor Eddie Obeng, and I think it's really relevant today. And one of the things that I notice is that we have a story running in our mind as to what the world is like. And you know, if you're an academic, this is called semiotics. And what happens is we have a number of signs, let's say like a street sign, words, letters, and we put all those together into a signifying order, and we create a story. And that story kind of acts as a filter. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that we create the story for ourselves, and once we create the story for ourselves, we kind of process and we go through. And what the pandemic has taught us is that that story came to an abrupt halt in 2020. And so now, as we start thinking about where are we going next, it's really important for us to think about the context of where we're coming from, what was happening right up to around 2019, 2020, and what kinds of opportunities it creates for us. So if you would, I'm going to tell you the story through my eyes as a parent. So this is where my world starts. In 2009, I become a father for the first time. And if many of you are parents, you may have a picture that looks a lot like this one. And what's happening in this picture? Well, in this picture, it looks very peaceful. You can see me lying next to my son. This is my 12-year-old now, but we're lying down together, and my wife was kind enough to snap this shot. And what's really happening, though, is a moment of panic. I am absolutely panicking. And what you can't see is that my arm is on his chest. And what am I checking for? I'm checking to see if he's breathing. If you are listening and you're a parent, you can put your hand up, maybe tap on something and see if that makes sense. When he went to school. So when my son goes to school for the very first time, I have a story running in my head. And the story that's running in my head is one of excitement. You see, I grew up and I didn't have a father when I was very young, so I had an idea as to what that would look like. And I thought to myself, you know, it's going to be really fantastic if I could walk my son to school every day. And I had an image in my head as to what that would look like. So the very first day, this is how the day goes. I wake up in the morning, I sit up on the bed. He gets up in the morning, he sits up on the bed. He's looking at me, I'm looking at him. His mom puts out his clothes for him to wear. His mom puts out my clothes for me to wear. We get dressed, we walk into the kitchen. I pour a bowl of cereal for him. We're looking down, he's eating cereal, I'm looking cereal. We're smiling back and forth. He puts on his backpack. It's a really big backpack that looks like an owl and his body is very small. And we're walking down the street together, downtown Toronto. And I can hear the cars honking, and I really think they're honking at me, and they're feeling the happiness that I'm feeling, probably not. And when we get to the school, I stop and I get to door number 4. So when I get to door number 4, what happens? Well, the teachers file out, and as the teachers come out, we are standing there, all of the parents. We're looking at each other. Nobody knows what to do. The kids are looking at each other. Nobody knows what to do. And all of a sudden, the teachers start calling the names, and all the students line up together. And as they line up all together, they get into a straight line and they march into the building. And as they march into the building, the door closes, and that's it. There's nothing. So I go home and I'm sitting down at the chair and I'm waiting about 6 hours in excitement and anticipation to get back to find out what's happening. And so as I go back, I get down on one knee, I see him running outside. I say, son, how was your day? And he says, good. Okay, we have one word. The next day comes along and I wake up in the morning, he wakes up in the morning. I'm sitting on the bed, he's sitting on the bed. He gets dressed, I get dressed. We go to the kitchen. I pour him a bowl of cereal. Have you heard the story before? We get all excited. We walk down to school holding hands. He goes inside into door number 4 and he comes back out and I say, son, how was your day? And he says, fine. So there are 2 words, 2 days, not bad. But as a new parent, I start to panic. I want to know what is happening. So I reach into his backpack, and as I reach into his backpack, what do I find? Well, more importantly, what do I expect to find? I expect to find books. I expect to find pencils. I expect to find homework, a calculator, but what do I find? I find nothing but an agenda. And so I start asking myself, what is really happening at his school? What is really happening at his school? And so I don't really know what is happening at his school. And so I start to think about school in of itself. And before I go on, I just want to make sure that I have visual. If somebody can let me know if you can see my presentation very well, and then I'll go on.
Yes, Dwayne, I can see
perfect. Perfect, thank you. So what does school look like? Well, when I went to school, school looked a little something like this. Everybody sat in the rows and that sort of stuff. Now, I went to school when I was quite young in the Caribbean, so the people looked a little bit different, but you get the idea. Typically what happened is the really, really bright students, the A's and the B's, sort of the students to the right, they sat on the right side, close to the teacher's desk, and the C's and the D's sat a little way off to the left, as you can see there. And if you can see all the way to the top left-hand corner, right, that's probably little Connor, and we all know who Connor was. I know who Connor was. In my class, we called Connor Dwayne, but you get the idea. And so this is typically what school looked like. And why did school look like this? Well, school looked like this because it was preparing us for a world of work that looked like this. And so you could see that these are probably the A's and the B's. You can see that they're sitting very nicely into rows. That person in the back is kind of like the teacher advising on what should be done, and everybody's well dressed. It's very organized. It's very standard. And if you were not in the A's and the B's, you might have been in the C's and the D's, and you would have been working at a place that looked like this, some kind of manufacturing where you put stuff together. And actually what was happening is school was creating contributing members of society to contribute into the economy. And the idea was, if we all contribute into the pond together, the pond gets a little bit bigger, everybody goes on to have a really good life. So fast forward to my time, and I'm going to age myself a little bit, but this is what school looked like when I went to school. And you can tell by the time period that I went to school, if you look at the teacher's pants, you can see that he has about 20 million pleats in his pants. Hopefully you don't have that many pleats in your pants today, but this is what school looked like. And you can see that the rows are still organized very much the same way. It's very sort of structured, the sharp kids to the front, and maybe little Connor or little Dwayne sitting off to the back, onto the side. But the very same structure. And what was that preparing us for? It prepared us for a world that looked like this. Now, when I've given this talk on a few occasions, I've asked people, what does this look like? Some people say it looks like hell, but this was the idea. These are cubicles for you, those of you that don't know. And a lot of people go into buildings and work that looks like this. These are the A's and the B's. Now, if you're in the C's and the D's, you may have gone into a place that looked like this, some kind of manufacturing. But what's really important is that you could do all of this and still have a very good life. You could still get yourself a house, perhaps maybe get on vacation once in a while, make sure that there's food on the table, and look at a little bit of sports perhaps on the weekend. But you still had an opportunity for a very good life because you were prepared for the economy ahead. Fast forward to a car manufacturing plant today, it starts to look a little something like this. Now, when I was there in Windsor, I knew that there were lots of car plants. I'm not sure what the status of those car plants are today, but this is what's coming. And if you look, this is a Tesla manufacturing plant. If you look really closely into this picture, way down and you zoom it in, you'd realize that there's 3 people where there might have been thousands. There are now 3 people and lots of robots. So now we've gone through the pandemic and everybody was forced into digital transformation. And some people are in spaces like Zoom and that sorts of stuff, but work in the office starts to look a little something like this. And what you're seeing here is a number of people in different geographic locations inside of a virtual space using physical objects that are mixed reality and virtual reality and 2-dimensional devices where they can engage and they're learning about stuff. They can actually reach out and touch things and move them around. This is happening today. So this is what a classroom starts to look like in 2019. And what do you notice about this classroom that's different probably from when you and I went to school? Well, what do I notice is the kids are not sitting in rows. They're all together on the floor. I noticed that the blackboard that I know is no longer a blackboard. It's now a screen. And then there's also a computer. And what else do I notice? The teacher's not at the front of the room. Where is the teacher? I don't know. She's probably moving around. He's probably moving around, speaking to someone else. So it starts to look very, very different. Now, as of 2020, lots of classes started to look like this, and hopefully we'll get past this point at some point in the not so distant future, but you start to get the idea that the world is changing and it's doing so very, very fast. Here is an example, and we'll talk a little bit about why this is really important as we get further into the presentation, but here's an example of Google rolling out its digital platform to 23 million students and teachers in India. This is profound in its scope, considering that Canada does not have 23 million students. It is a massive, massive undertaking, and the kinds of impact that it's going to have on the global economy is staggering. We live our lives responding to a world that we know and understand, but no longer exists. Now, as we start thinking about this, typically what we do is as any kind of new innovation comes in, we typically try to initially make a substitution and hopefully take that new innovation and snap it onto the systems that we have and just make a quick substitution. So things like, if you can think of Google Docs or things like this, where you're taking a physical thing and you're turning it into a digital thing. But there are very profound implications. Here's an example. So before we get to the example, let's talk a little bit very specifically about the problem. The economy is being digitally transformed by the convergence of the 4th industrial revolution technology. And the old education model was not designed for the speed of this paradigmatic shift. Students are being prepared for the old economy that is quickly being replaced by a globally, digitally transformed economy. This is happening exponentially. Here's an example. A couple of weeks ago on the news, you might have seen that there were a number of cyber attacks. There was actually something called a cyber attack ransomware tsunami, where 200 companies were overwhelmed at once on the North American continent. Lots of infrastructure was attacked, gas, water, electricity, and there was not a very robust response to that. And what's really interesting is, though they suspect that these are state-sponsored organizations that are attacking North America through cyber, a lot of it are very small cells, individual people operating at the scale of a state. Now, there are 3.5 million high-paying cybersecurity jobs that are open. And that's across the planet. There are 800,000 of those jobs here in Canada. If we took every single person in cybersecurity and we filled them out right now, these are the kinds of gaps that we would have. So remember at the beginning, we're talking about matching school to economy. So here's just one example of us not necessarily paying attention to what is happening around us and how quickly that digital transformation is taking place, and where we see a major gap, but massive opportunities. Are we preparing students for 2019 and before, or are we preparing them for 2030? This is a question that I'm obsessed with and I think about almost daily. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll probably see that it comes up at least once a week, but it's something that I think is fundamentally extremely important. And the pandemic has created an opportunity for us to take a pause and start thinking about, how do we reorganize that semiotic construction to have a new signifying order and a new story that talks about the opportunities that we have ahead? But how did I get here? Well, really quickly, let me give you a quick backstory. Based on a book, we went on an adventure. Now, at the very beginning, Dr. Lamb was kind enough to talk a little bit about my university experience, but the real secret sauce to almost everything that I've done is my wife. So at the end of school, we both came out, we were married, and we both had our OSAP loans, and we sat down together and we decided that we would need to pay off these loans. I wanted to pay off the loans right away, and my wife was wiser than me, said, you know, I think I want to travel, and I'm going to figure out a way for us to travel and pay off our loans together. And that's exactly what we did. And so we found ourselves in a country called Peru. And when we went to Peru, we thought it was going to be a very altruistic experience where we were going to, you know, perhaps maybe help the poor little boys and girls with education. But that's actually not what happened. What happened is we landed up here. This is FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's an international private school. At the time, it was ranked number 3 in South America and one of the top private schools in the world. And there, we did a little bit of strategic planning. And while I was doing strategic planning, I was on a drive into the jungle, and I went through one of the most polluted towns in the world, a place called La Oroya. And I had an epiphany after speaking to a number of people there. And I decided that I was going to leave education and I was going to go into technology transfer. And so what did I do in technology transfer? I would find any kind of paradigm shifting innovation that was based on very specific models that would disrupt entire industries. And I did that on behalf of large resource companies. So at the time, they were looking for any kind of clean technology that would help them to remain as energy companies as we looked at the sunset of fossil fuels. I exited that company not too long after. And after I exited that company, I started to work with another firm called Yet2.com. And while I was at Yet2.com, I met the founder. The founder was this man. This man is Ben DuPont. He is the middle son of the DuPont dynasty. If you've ever seen a fire hydrant somewhere, his grandfather has claims to that. If you have nylon in your house somewhere, that's his family. Kevlar, the bulletproof vests, his family. DuPont, the miracle of science. And so I was really fortunate to be mentored by Ben. And while I was being mentored by Ben, he would tell me about this dinner that he had. The dinner was called a non-obvious dinner. And what they did at this dinner was they thought about what are some of the non-obvious ways that the world will change in the next 5 to 10 years? And he invited CEOs, generals. Once upon a time, the now president was also a member of these dinners. And I was not fortunate enough to be invited. But what did I learn when he came back was to think about, how do we think about the future? How do we think about innovations? And how do we think about how it impacts those industries in a very sort of structured way? And so here's some of the things that I've learned that I want to share with you about education, industry, and innovation and opportunities. So here are a few reasons why your students' world will be different and why it matters. So our story starts here. If you are a grad from the University of Windsor, and depending on your vintage, you might actually know this building. This is Cody Hall. To the top right-hand corner, that window I'm looking, and I don't know if you can see me now, but I'm smiling, but that's 419. And I lived there at least for 10 months of my life. It was very, very exciting being in this building. And while I was there, I had a roommate, and him and I were talking. His name was Mike, and he came to me and he said, Dwayne, in my class today, the professor came and said that there is this really cool innovation that we should learn about. And I said, Mike, what is that called? He said, well, apparently it's called the internet. And we should go to the computer center. If you remember, it's just off to the right of the screen. We should go to the computer center and find out what is this internet and how do you surf it? Now, this is in my lifetime. And unless you believe that I'm an Asgardian at about 1,500 years, it's not that long ago. This is inside of my lifetime. And so I go downstairs and we go into the computer center and we have this conversation. Fast forward to about 2006, the internet is a little bit more robust and we have all these kinds of devices. And lo and behold, the real revolution starts at an odd point. Now, before I go on, while I was there, one of my favorite shows to watch was Star Trek Next Generation. And this was the device in Star Trek Next Generation. And just to give a little bit of context, consider that we're talking about the most advanced engineers and rocket scientists floating through space with a device like this. And I will ask you, who do you give these devices to today and what it is called? Today, we know that this is a tablet and we give this to our 2-year-olds. My 2-year-old daughter recently put in my codes, opened up my iPad, navigated through to Netflix and started to look at shows that I told her not to look at, and she is 2. And while that's cute, that's a very, very significant piece of information, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. So where does it start? It starts with this man. Ironically, a child of Syrian refugees. He came to the United States and he started this little company that you might have heard of called Apple. And while he was there was a man by the name of Tony Fadell that walked in one day and said, hey, I have this great idea for this thing called an iPod. And what's really interesting about the iPod is that we can actually create a store with the iPod. They put this together with a little piece of innovation that they were working on called the iPhone. And now we have millions and millions of iPhones. And what people may not have necessarily realized was the App Store was the first store that was open 24 hours a day inside of someone's house. And that means a lot of innovators and a lot of people rushed in to start to create these things that we now call apps or applications. And those applications created lots and lots of information and connected lots and lots of things. And so now we're moving into the Internet of Things, where lots of things are connected. 37 billion new things were connected last year in 2020, and that number is growing exponentially. I can just look around my room right now. I wouldn't even want to say it, but there's a speaker in the corner that if I say something will turn on. I have a number of devices. This watch is making sure that I don't get too excited from all the caffeine that I've had this morning. And so we have all these things that are connected. And this creates a massive amount of information. Now, this is an old slide, and I left it in for a specific reason. In 2009, the second square to the left, this is all the global data when my son was born. In 2019, To the right is all the global data in 2019, just before the pandemic. You can see that the information is growing exponentially. And this has a very profound impact on all of the things that we're going to do. Well, here's what that looks like today. So you can see that by 2025, just in a few years from now, it'll go from 30 zettabytes of data to 175. So we have an exponential curve as we're going all the way up. And that exponential curve is going to have a profound impact on all of the things that we're able to do. We're going to have a lot of threats that need to be mitigated, but we're going to have an exponential amount of opportunities. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of context on this, okay? Remember Cody Hall? Well, in Cody Hall, I spent some time there, and eventually my girlfriend came up to school, and we broke up on our first year. If there's anybody here, you may or may not know this story. If there's anybody here that went to school with me, but we broke up. And so what we did, for some of the people that are on here that may not know, is we would create something called a mixtape. And that mixtape would be some of the best slow songs that you could find, love songs where you could pour your heart out, maybe Jodeci, maybe Roxette, but you could pour your heart out in this construction. And while you were creating these mixtapes, that boombox, that radio, had about 135,000 transistors in it. And it was state of the art. Well, today I have an iPhone, and my iPhone now has 11 billion transistors on a single chip. It can create 11 trillion operations per second. This is growing exponentially, and this is in my pocket. This is in your pocket. And so that is a profound amount of power. There's more power in your pocket, if you've ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, than all of NASA during that movie, The Hidden Figures. It is profound. We make millions of these phones every year, and they generate millions of data. And that allows us to do all kinds of interesting things. So we talked a little bit about Cody Hall and me spending some time looking at Star Trek: The Next Generation. Those of you that are on here should know this. If not, I'm judging you quietly. But this is Captain Jean-Luc Picard. And what's really interesting here, this is a very iconic scene. He walks over in his ready room to a box, and he looks at the box and he says, "Computer, Earl Grey hot," and materializes this cup of tea, and he sits down and he starts thinking about whatever challenge he's trying to solve. Now, we're not exactly at Earl Grey hot, but here is today. We have a 3D printer, and we can make interesting things like basketballs and plastic little figurines. We have a couple of things around the house, but what really interests me as we start thinking about how this connects to economy is this. At the bottom, you have Under Armour shoes that were millions of dollars in the making to create a 3D printed Under Armour shoe. And at the top right-hand corner, a teenage boy in Beijing created those shoes. Imagine what it means if it takes one group millions of dollars and someone else maybe $1,500. Imagine what that does to industry. Imagine what it does to distribution. Imagine what it does for the economy altogether. We're living it right now. If you think about Amazon as it slowly eats every single mall on planet Earth, but creates way more millionaires than any mall ever could. It's a fascinating story, but it's happening today. And we have to start thinking about how we plan for it. Here, as we talk a little bit about 3D printing, this is a really interesting man that I met. His name is Andrew Hessel, and he's in charge of sustainable programmable manufacturing. And he is looking at printing 3D DNA and human parts. And here's an example of not his work, but some of the work that was done in Israel, where they actually 3D printed a living human, well, not human heart, but a living heart that was beating and moving. So we start seeing that this is happening very, very fast at a very, very profound speed all around the world. And now that we're connected, we can connect with all of these things. We can find all these people and start making really interesting connections. Here you can see this gentleman here, ruggishly handsome, maybe not so much, but this is me actually. I am looking at mixed reality. And through this mixed reality experience, I'm thinking about finding ways to interact and create a whole new dimension of computing. And as we start thinking about how that can shrink, here's an example of focal Focal is a company that was doing the same thing that you saw with those big giant glasses. They've shrunk the glasses down to something that's smaller, that looks a little something like this. This company was recently, I believe, purchased by Amazon, or at least invested by Amazon, and now they're moving on. And we have a number of large tech companies that are coming up with technologies like these that integrate into our lives. Imagine what happens when we mix those kinds of technologies with our voice technology. Imagine what happens when we mix it with AI. Here's Professor Geoffrey Hinton at the University of Toronto, who is one of the godfathers of deep learning. Imagine as we start putting all those things together into what I call the technology orchestration, the possibilities and probabilities. Obviously, yes, lots of risks that we need to mitigate, but there's a massive potential of things that we can do. And what really drives that is, what is the story that we tell ourselves and what is the outcome that we'd like? So in the last 2 years, we've created 900% more data. In 2019, AI contributed about $2 trillion to the global GDP. By 2030, that number is expected to go up to $150 trillion. And along with it, our capabilities. Tie that into blockchain, and we now realize that we're living in a very completely different world. Here's what that looks like. As we can see the acceleration of this technology growth, we're in a J curve, and now we're moving exponentially. And that exponential movement will start to create lots of challenges for how fast we take in particular types of innovation. Let me give you an example. Right now, much of our education is based around technology, a fundamental technology that was innovated 600 years ago. We call that a printed book. And that printed book, it took us about 150 years before we actually got a printed book once we created the printing press. And so this changes very profoundly what the opportunities are. So this is called the fourth industrial revolution. And we are now entering into the exponentially augmented age. So a quick story. Once upon a time when I came here, one of my biggest goals was to have a family and to take my son onto the Disney cruise. And this happened for me in 2018. The Disney cruise, I may not necessarily be doing cruises anytime soon, but at the time, it felt like I needed to give up a lung and a kidney to get on here. They're quite expensive. We saved for quite a long time to get there. And when I got there, my son, I looked at him and I said, son, what do you want to do? He goes, I just want to go by the pool and have some fries. I said, no, you want to really explore this boat. I go, there's a really cool wristband that you can put on and you can walk around the boat on your own and you can take pictures with all these kinds of characters. I go, do you want to take a picture with Mickey Mouse? And he says, no. I go, do you want to take a picture with Thor? And he says, no. He says, I'd like to take a picture with the Black Panther. And this was before the movie came out. I said, I don't know you're going to run into the Black Panther. And so anyways, he is running down the stairs like I told him not to do. And as he's running down the stairs, he bumps into this person. And who is it? It's the Black Panther. I'm not with him. And so he reaches out to his phone. They give you a little phone on the boat. And he says, Dad, I've run into the Black Panther. What should I do? I said, take a picture. Get somebody to take a picture. So this is the picture that was taken with him and the Black Panther. And interestingly enough, he came back and he said to me, he said, Dad, you talk a lot about the future. And you weren't actually there when I bumped into the Black Panther. He said, are you the Black Panther? I said, no, son. I go, I'm not the Black Panther, but I am here speaking to you about the future and talking about new innovations and new technologies. So remember in that movie, the Marvel movie, if you've seen the movie, you'll notice I make lots of references or analogies to shows, but this is a scene and this is Tony Stark, and Tony Stark is using mixed reality here. And what's important about this is that this technology was designed in the show for a billionaire. Here is today. This is my son connected to a few students out in Calgary, connected to a few students in the Caribbean. And what we're working on here is we're working on how to upgrade the Mars rover. So you can see we pulled in lots of things. This is happening in mixed reality while he is inside of a virtual reality. We're using multiple devices that can engage, they can get in and work socially. This was during the middle of the pandemic, where we wanted to create a social environment, but still have him connected to screens and have the power of computation. And so this is our living room. It doesn't look like that on his interface, but this is what it looks like when I was looking at him. These things are actually floating in the room itself. And so this is possible today. Here's what his experience would look like. This is him inside of the room looking at me inside of the room as we're manipulating and moving things with our hands at scale, and we can bend and shape things in ways that we can't do with physics. Here's the potential of what that looks like today. This is Microsoft HoloLens 2, and students can connect from different places in the world. You'll notice that the person to the left there is looking at it through an actual device, and the other two people are looking at it through headsets. Here's the potential of work. There are lots of organizations right now that are thinking of ways of training their workers, and we have found that workers are having an increase in retention by up to 20 to 40%, depending on the study. So these are having profound impacts on the way that we learn and work. Here we're back to Tony Stark, and these are the fancy glasses that he has. These ones are called Friday. I don't know if you remember the movie. He gives them to Spider-Man, and I'm nerding out, guys. I'm a little bit of a Marvel guy, and this is what it looks like. Here are a pair of glasses that were made by Unreal, and these glasses are around for $300 today, and the price of those are dropping rapidly. There are a number of big companies that will be coming out with glasses like these in the next 24 months. Here's what that interface can look like. So the very last one I'll go through before we switch gears and we talk about what are some of the things that we can do is, this is called generative design. This computer actually uses AI to scour the web to find the most profound ways to design pieces of innovation. It found a flying squirrel's pelvis and created a drone chassis. Here's a really interesting one. This is a bridge actually building itself using AI and generative design. And here's an actual office in Toronto that used generative design to design itself to find the most efficient ways to move around pre-pandemic. So typically at this point, lots of people I'm really uncomfortable with all the things that you shared, Dwayne. And I said, that's fine. It's actually quite natural. In the 16th century, this professor said, there is a technology that we have, and it's going to ruin the minds of our children because it's going to destroy their ability to think, and it's going to destroy their ability to remember. And that technology that he was talking about was the printed book. So what's our challenge? Well, our biggest challenge, remember before I talked a little bit about substitution with technology, our biggest challenge is, one of the things that we do is when we build something that's really good, we start drinking our own Kool-Aid. And instead of thinking about the actual function, we really focus on optimizing form. So we optimize form at the expense of function. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. In 1988, I came to Toronto. And when I came to Toronto, I had a suitcase that looked something like this, right? It was a big, giant suitcase. We called it a grip. And it was extremely heavy because my entire life was in there. I had to drag it through the airport. And as I was dragging it through the airport, I thought, gosh, this is the absolute worst. And probably about a couple years ago, I was going through the airport, and I remember this experience as I was walking, spinning my suitcase in circles on its wheels. And I started to think to myself, why did it take so long? Why did it take so long for us to actually put wheels on a suitcase? The wheel is one of the first things that we created, but it took us hundreds of years to think about why we would put the wheels on something like this. And I realized is that we spent a lot of time thinking about, maybe we should make it red, maybe we should have new handles, maybe we'll make it brown, maybe we'll make it leather, a little bit harder. We optimize the form versus the function. Now, another example is a cell phone. Once upon a time, I was having a conversation with a few people, and the conversation was really around, will teenagers get brain cancer from speaking so much on cell phones? Because when we were teenagers, all we did was talk on the cell phone all night. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. No, you hang up first. Okay, I'm not hanging up. No, you go ahead. Right? That's what we did. But today, I ask you and I challenge you, when was the last time you saw a teenager speak on a cell phone for 30 minutes? It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And so we were optimizing for form versus function. The function is for teenagers to be able to connect with one another and have these shallow connections. And we see that social media does a very, very good job at that, for them to be able to express themselves and to have these shallow connections, which is part of the reason as to why it's so sticky. So form versus function. And so these things, they change in a very profound way. And I'll give you an example. I would go down to the library, and when I went to the library, I would have to say, okay, I'd like to look up Robert Mugabe. And so I'm going to look up Robert Mugabe, and I go down to the library just past the student center. I meet with the librarian. They said, oh, let me look through the Dewey Decimal System. I'm going to find you over here. Oh my gosh, those books are taken out. The person is not bringing them back till Friday. You'll have to come back. The whole process might have taken me 7 days. So a few years ago, my son came home and he said, Dad, I have a presentation to do on Robert Mugabe. Well, this was my dad moment. I was extremely excited. I stood up really tall. And as I was about to say it, he said, hey, I won't say the name because my whole house will light up, but S-I-R-I. And, tell me about Robert Mugabe. And all of a sudden he has, hey, I'll send that to you to your phone. He has thousands and thousands of videos, websites, newsreels, everything in seconds. What took me 7 days took him about 3 seconds. It is a profound change, a profound change. So what can he do? Well, if he gets in to see something that he can't read, there are lots of innovations like these. This was a project that we did with the folks at Global DWS, where we actually used AI to figure out reading levels and reading suggestions based on those reading levels. Here is another example. This is an organization that has an interesting software that allows students to learn about writing from the very basic 6 traits all the way up to the very complex, and having proper citations if their professor's online. I know that probably got you really excited. I remember my first year and everybody thought, gosh, it is absolutely awful how the students write. And so this technology is out there to help that. So imagine now my 10-year-old son has access to this kind of information, access to ability to help him read, access to things that are able to help him write. All of a sudden, it starts to really change the relationship that adult has with child. It starts to change the relationship of the economy. It starts to change the relationship of education. We are witnessing the birth of a pre-configurative cultural model where students no longer have to be dependent on gatekeeping adults. And this is profound. We have an extraordinary amount of oppressive power over children, and we leverage that through words because we've spent a lot more time with words and books, and we tell them you have to learn these words, but you're probably not going to catch up to me at least for another 25 years. But now they have an ability to get around us. Remember I mentioned my daughter at 2, my son? Think about the profound impact. And many of you, if you're parents on the line, you know exactly what I'm talking about as you thumb through and you have to call your 10-year-old to help you figure out the television. So I know I'm short on time. We're probably coming up on the 45-minute mark, and I want to leave some time for some questions. So I'm going to go through rapid fire, if you can believe, a little bit faster than I'm going right now. So what I want you to do is to get ready to screen capture the next 3 slides. So if you're on Apple, you know, it's the option on the 4, get ready for that screen capture. Okay, here we go. So what are we doing? We're moving from a world of expertise to a world of agility. On the left, this is the old paradigm. This is what school looked like just at the cusp of when I graduated. We went to school typically for 25 years. We went through a series of gates, and hopefully if I got to the top of that gate, I would get into a university. We eventually landed a job, and my plan was to stay there for a long period of time, eventually have a nice retirement package, and spend maybe 5 years of good health, and then die. And so that's changed. The new paradigm is now one of agility. We're going to learn, engage, and leverage what we've learned. We're going to learn and engage and leverage what we've learned. And we're seeing that today. We're seeing that with the disruption of post-secondary education. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. And again, where those opportunities lie. Here's what that looks like again with a different view. And you can see that the average lifespan is about 73. Now it's gone on to about 90. And we're going to be learning and engaging all throughout our lives. Like for myself, I can't even contemplate the idea of retirement. I feel I'm going to just have to be working all the way to the end. And I'm actually looking forward to that. So this one is a really interesting slide, and these slides are done by Heather McGowan. These aren't mine. She's great. She's out in Australia. If you get a chance, give her a follow. But the old economy is really about deciphering, deciding, and deploying. So expertise, individual cognitive intelligence was super important. And we are, we are the end result of that. We represent that status quo. Today's reality, it starts to be a little bit different. We're looking at discovery, we're looking at developing, we're looking at formulating an entrepreneurial outlook and collaboration. How do we socially and emotionally collaborate with one another to create desired outcomes? Here are the top skills, and just a few more points, if you will permit me, and then we'll move to Q&A. We are moving from a standardized system to a personalized system at scale. We're moving from socially accepted exclusion and exceptionality focus to higher levels of inclusion and a wider interlinked portions of global populations. Technology can disrupt the gatekeeper if it is in a disruptive model. In education, the gatekeeper is post-secondary. So here's a quick example. We'll finish on this. This is the University of Windsor, my beloved school, in my beloved city. There you see also the University of Waterloo, and there we have Brock and Western universities, right? But what I want you to look at here is pay attention to the number of students in these schools. So University of Windsor, depending on who you ask, is somewhere about 16 to maybe 20,000 students. So if I take the top 5 students, the top 5 universities, these are the numbers that I get. Last summer, Google launched a program in August, and they said, for $300, we're going to give you a certificate program, and at the end of that, there's a high probability that you're going to get a job starting at $93,000 a year, either with us or other people that are like us. And so this was a profound moment that many education institutions may have not noticed. Here's that course today. I took the screenshot yesterday. I want you to look at the number of students enrolled. There are 277,000 students enrolled in this course. That is larger than the top 5 universities altogether. This happened inside of a year. The change is profound and it's exponential. And so this is one certificate. They've now launched a number of other certificates. This represents almost $19 million worth of profit and innovation. And it's all coming for post-secondary education to release that gatekeeper hold. And others will follow. Here's IBM, 43,000 students enrolled. I had an interesting conversation. I was on LinkedIn, and a 15-year-old student that was a paid intern at IBM reached out to me and said, we're creating some IBM courses. We'd love to integrate with one of the companies that I'm on the advisory board. It's called OVS, Ontario Virtual School. We'd love to integrate with them to do something, and it would be interesting to see. And I look, and these are the numbers, 15 and paid. And what he said to me was really interesting. He said to me, he said, it would be much better if I just stayed here and did this for 5 years. I would learn so much. So here's the opportunity. I believe that this is a massive opportunity for Canadian universities and for cities with profiles like Windsor. A massive opportunity, particularly post-pandemic. So what are some of the steps? I believe the first thing to focus on strategically is to build a bridge to the future, to very specifically have an understanding of what is happening around us and to build a bridge to the future with very specific milestones with very compelling value propositions to get people from the present to the future. I think the next important thing should be leveraging and enhancing the school and the city brand value proposition. What are some of the key things? If I could think off the top of my head, I live here in Toronto, where I probably need about $850,000 to buy myself a park bench, and I probably would have to share that park bench with another family with a separating wall. We'd probably call it a semi. And so Windsor, the real estate is very different. The view is very different. So I would think of ways to create very innovative co-work spaces and co-school studio spaces to expand and enhance that value proposition. I would think of digital and social innovations, of ways to attract people to the space either physically or digitally and enhance those, leveraging the channel brands. And then most importantly, I would think about meaningful strategic diversity and inclusion. One of the key strengths that we realize is the ability to connect to other places in the world in meaningful ways is quite unique. During the Q&A period, we can talk a little bit about one of the experiences that I had, but I think that's very, very important. It's not a matter of altruism, of the right thing to do, which is fine, but I think it's a matter of really maximizing the opportunity. And last, develop and co-develop partnerships to create meaningful alternative paths. So I'll end with this. The pandemic, if I were to use an analogy, is like a tiger. It's a threat, and we can see that. But there is a hidden opportunity, and that hidden opportunity I call the hidden tiger. And so I'm going to leave this up, and I know that you can see the tiger, but let me know when you find the hidden tiger on this shot. So let me help you out. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you can, right here up by the shoulder blade is a T. As I move down, you can see the H. Right next here by the leg is the E. HIDDENTIGER down the back leg. And once you see it, I want you to ask yourself one question. Now that I've seen it, how come I didn't see it before? And now that I've seen it, can I unsee it? Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dwayne. This is fascinating. The information that you have shared with us today has given us so much to reflect on, and I know that I am inspired. And every time I have the opportunity to hear you speak, it pushes me forward in my journey. So right now is the Q&A portion of our session today. And again, please feel free to start entering your questions through the Q&A function on your screen. So we have a attendee today. Thank you, Dwayne. This was great. How can educators and school boards move away from the rote memorization model of learning, in many school boards, not all, to a more technical and engaging model that you have presented in order to prepare youth for 2030? Is there risk of creating a have versus have not culture due to exposure or lack of exposure to these models?
Sure, and so it sounds like two questions. So let's tackle the second one first, and then we'll go back to the first one second. So the first question is that in the right model, technology actually knocks down gates. So when we look at it, we start thinking, gosh, you know what? There's a challenge with access, and there's a challenge of opportunity. And I will say that the way that we have distribution organized creates that challenge. But permit me, if you will, by September, almost everybody on the planet will have access to internet, or have the potential to have access to internet. So an additional 5 billion people will potentially have that access. Now, what does that mean? That means that there's a massive amount of information out there. So that's piece number one. Piece number two is that we create about 2 billion internet devices every year, and we have between 3 and 4 billion users. So every 2 to 3 years, we have an excess of about 1 billion devices that are still perfectly fine. So our challenge really is around distribution of those resources, because a lot of those well-functioning devices are in your house or in a landfill somewhere. And I believe that there are very creative ways that public-private partnerships can be created to move these devices around. Lots of corporations have to throw this stuff away. They spend millions of dollars to get it swiped and cleaned and shipped out. I believe that there's lots of ways that we can have that engagement where you can see these partnerships where lots of these devices go into communities and leveraging that connection. So that's piece number one. Now, piece number two, in terms of the actual school systems themselves, I would say that the very first thing that school systems should start getting away from is false binary conversations. We have to do this or we have to do that. It's one for everybody or none for no one. And so remember I talked a little bit about personalization at scale. So I think we need to move to more personalization at scale and on demand. We can see these with things like Uber and that sort of stuff. And one of the best ways that I can think about how to do that is to create a red team, blue team strategy, where we have one team that's looking at how do we make incremental changes to the system that we have today. And then we have another team, the red team, that's looking at, okay, what are innovative ways or innovative models that we can create, and we can create those models at scale. I can think of a few models that you can create inside of individual schools and scales those up. And as they start to scale, you'll start to see a migration of people as they start thinking about the personalization, what works best for them. And I think the pandemic is, it's not over. And so because it's not over, we still have an opportunity inside of the crisis to start thinking about how do we want to reorganize these pieces with education, particularly when the stakes are a little bit less, right? Like we know that we're not operating at full optimization in terms of where we were before. But if we think about where we were before, only about 30% success rate. If post-secondary is a success rate, it's only about 30% for most countries. I mean, Canada, we have the highest post-secondary educated population on planet Earth. Ontario has the highest post-secondary educated population inside of Canada. So kind of an anomaly, but for the most part, most places around the planet are somewhere about 30%. We're hovering somewhere at about 65%. But we should really think about, if I got 65% in Professor Metcalf's course, I might not have passed. So it's really important that we should think about how do we get to 80%? How do we get to 90%? And I think flexibility in terms of creating these new models will make a lot of sense. The last I could think of is I'd add a fifth term. I could add a fifth term, and that fifth term could really just be around project-based and innovation and partnerships with larger organizations to really have a closer match between the future of work and the future of education.
Yes, thank you, Dwayne. Yes, I agree. The personalization and being flexible. I've seen that, this past year with my own children in virtual school, and how children as well as teachers are so resilient, as well as compassionate to the situation that we are in today. Okay, another question looks at, what do you see as the biggest problem that will result from private educators in the post-secondary business?
The biggest problem that could come out is speed. So private education organizations can move significantly faster. When I speak with a private organization, the opportunities are similar. And as a matter of fact, there are lots of opportunities to move even faster. A lot of private schools are based on reputation and status quo. So they're based on relationships, they're based on reputation, and they're based on the status quo. So if they believe that their systems are humming along quite well, they're going to go with what they have, right? So I could think of, schools that are doing AP or schools that are doing IB. They say, hey, listen, IB student gets in there, they're going to crush the exams and they're going to do really well, so we're fine. I think the opportunity for public is that they can start to create leapfrog moments. So the narrative in the head of, hey, we have to catch up and pie slice. Maybe we take what they have so we can have more. I think the opportunity is really about pie baking. How do we create more pies now that we have new opportunities? And I'll give you an example. In 2019, mostly private schools had access to digital devices and any kind of online. And here we are in 2021, and most public schools in lower income neighborhoods all the way up have access to the same tools and the same capabilities today. As a matter of fact, they have access to more. If you are in a school and you are focused on special needs students or students with learning challenges, that's actually personalized learning. And so you can leverage a lot of that and spread it out and fan it out across the school itself and move significantly faster because you have less of a vested interest into the status quo. So if you look at disruptive theory as mapped out by Clayton Christensen, he talks a lot about this. The incumbent will move slowly and make incremental changes, whereas the disenfranchised, the overserved, and the underserved will move significantly faster. And so I think if you add in student voice in the right framework, you'll find that there's a massive movement to start creating things that move a lot faster with a lot more opportunity. So I think making those fundamental breaks in framework will really turbo boost a lot of that movement.
Great, thank you, Dwayne. And one final question for today. Dwayne, it's Kevin Mill. Say hi to Susan for me. It's too bad we couldn't be in person. Excellent talk. We are limited by the speed of investment and uptake of new education models, such that once they are embedded, we are now preparing for 2050. Universities turn slower than Disney cruise ships. How do we make new types of education possible faster in higher ed?
So great question. At the very beginning, before we start, Kevin, you might not have heard this, but I said Kevin was really super smart. And so he came with a really super smart question. And typically when I say great question, it's because I'm thinking I don't have an answer for you. But here are my thoughts. First off, it's great to hear from you. I hope you and your wife and family are doing well. In terms of speed, one of the experiences that I had was a while ago, I did a project with a large oil company called Shell. And they're a big, slow moving entity with money that says we should stay moving slow. And what they did was they created something called Shell Game Changer. And Shell Game Changer was a different vehicle that sat on its own and created lots of innovative ideas with a certain kind of budget towards those innovative ideas and very specific milestones. I believe that education should do the same. I believe that they should create these innovative experiences that they connect in, and it's its own separate brand, it's its own separate piece, and you will find that you're going to have people move into those spaces. Now, if you do that with a disruptive way, you realize that if we follow along the disruptive path, we're really looking at MVPs. So we don't need things that are as big and as robust, as beautiful as the whole overall campus. We're looking at small studio-like spaces where we can create very innovative models. And those innovative models have very specific impact, and you connect it to the end. And so I could think of a few different ways to do that. For example, just in terms of intake and uptake. So if we're thinking in terms of actual money, you need to have more students coming in. So 16,000 students is not going to be enough. So you have to start thinking about how do we get 100,000 students? And so how do you do that? Well, you create partnerships with other organizations. I'm on the advisory board of a virtual high school called OVS, and they have 10,000 students, and they're growing in the next year to about 20,000 students, and in the year after that to about 50,000 students. And so when you think of that kind of growth, you can leverage, and this is me thinking off the top of my head, Kevin, you can leverage English. Remember in the first year, I don't know if that's improved any, but professors usually groan and gripe about the English coming in. You can actually partner with OVS, which English is actually their most popular course. You can partner and create an on-ramp course. And that on-ramp course now all of a sudden allows you to have much more students coming in your direction. You're working with a source that has about 50,000 students coming in the direction to you, and you're looking then at this future of work sort of idea. So now you know that you have this pipeline that's going for future of work preparedness, and you create your innovation center there. And as you do that, you now start having this opportunity that's generating money. So now when you sit down and you have the budget conversation, you can say, hey, look at this. It's generating a little bit of money. It's growing. And so now we can take some of the money that we're coming in because we're bringing in our own students, and we can put it into our innovation center and grow that innovation center. So I think there's, and that's at a very high level. Obviously, as we come down to the 30,000 foot view, there's details, but there are lots of examples like these, in terms of tech transfer and the like, where you can take these very specific examples. You can grow something that's very interesting with interesting partnerships, and you can really grow that out from the 16,000 to the 100,000. Now, I think it's very possible, specifically for a place like Windsor, because Windsor has a real geographical advantage. And this is going to affect a lot of post-secondary education. The very top-tiered schools, the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons, they will survive this, but everybody below that needs to know that they're on high alert in terms of the next 5 to 10 years, because as you can see from that Google piece, that happened in a year, 277,000 students in 1 year, which is profound. And that's not going to let up anytime soon. But Kevin, thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you. So this concludes our Q&A, and thank you all for your questions. We have many more questions than we have time for. And again, as Dwayne said in the beginning, that you can contact him through LinkedIn, and to also give him time to respond to all of your questions. So as an educator, as a parent of school-aged children, as also a lifelong learner, Dwayne, I have deep gratitude for your knowledge, your perspective, and your inspiration. Thank you for changing the trajectory of how we think and for giving us important tools that are vital in our ability to thrive and flourish during and post-pandemic. Also, I would like to thank all of you for being here today. I know each of our journeys are different. However, today our journeys have crossed. We are here together in time and space. So may we continue to have hope for a bright future, have faith that opportunities will happen, but most of all, to have courage to take today's opportunity as a positive step forward in moving through and beyond this pandemic together. I encourage everyone to visit Dwayne's website for more inspiration. You can find the link on our U Windsor Envision series website. We will be drawing another prize winner from today's attendees for a $200 University of Windsor and City of Windsor prize package. I hope you will also join us again for the remaining Envision series sessions scheduled each month this year. On September 2nd is Maya Roy, current CEO of YWCA Canada, seasoned policymaker and trilingual nonprofit leader for over 20 years. Her topic in our next Envision session, Equitable Futures Post-Pandemic, will discuss how women, Two-Spirit and gender diverse people are at the forefront of Canada's pandemic response and how they need to be centered in Canada's economic recovery efforts moving forward. RSVP information will follow. So on behalf of the University of Windsor, the City of Windsor, and everyone here today, again, Dwayne, much gratitude to you. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.